Indeed, speaking on what exactly is on the ground, the truth is the floods are waging havoc. The rains will continue until June. Facts shared by the weatherman. Therefore, all we have is to shape up and step up. The question being asked this morning is how? And especially at different levels of authority, including your same authority. As a citizen, as a member of the public, what is your responsibility? What we have seen now raised is, including the engineers and those doing constructions, if they're watching this morning, there is need to respond at your levels. Of course, the panelists are also aware that there are certain constructions that are incomplete, making it a bit worse for the residents of particular areas. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. On this global outlook, what we're seeing here on the Africa Daily is they're saying there's some cities, all right, because Honorable Kitelewa rightfully put it, climate change is here with us. It's a natural thing. But how we mitigate, how Dr. of course Onyango has put it, is the point. You know, we have to be responsive. And you have said we shouldn't just be reactionary. But do we learn? You know, just the other day we had one of the worst droughts in Kenya. Of course, in the last 40 years. And then here we are, the floods. Now, here are some cities in Africa that have responded to climate shocks, that's what they put it, and what others can learn from their experiences and better understand how to build a future of climate resilience. Before I even mention them, this paper is purporting that Kenya is not an island, neither is Dubai, because, gentlemen, Dubai, just the other day, experienced floods. Now, so that Kenyans understand, it's just not here. Even the beautiful Dubai experienced some very serious, tragic floods. Let me start with you on coming together.
Thanks. With Dubai, maybe a quick comment on that. I think for Dubai, and I'm not excusing the infrastructure and all that, but I'm just imagining seeing geographically where they are located, and probably not experiencing as constant and regular rainfall as we do in our part of the world. I think for them, I will not excuse, like I said, I'm not excusing what has happened, but I think for them it was more of, this is a new phenomenon to them.
All right.
So probably a bit of lack of experience, probably they built their drainage, but sand has clogged up and all those things. And also the danger and the risk, the fact that a lot of their land is reclaimed. If you've watched those documentaries on Nat Geo, how they build these superstructures and how they reclaim, land from the ocean and from the sea, I have a feeling with Dubai they are more shocked. But I would wager that in the next 2 years, if something like this occurs, we will not see what we saw.
So they would have learned.
They will have learned.
But first of a kind for them, but you expect that they will behave better next.
They'll be much better for them because of even the kind of advanced engineering techniques they've put in place, and probably the money they will pour into this, to just making sure that it's a tourist region, and so if the tourists cannot feel safe, then they will lose market and all that. So I don't expect them to go through this another time. Coming back to our part of the world, we have had continual exposure to this phenomenon, and for at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'll take you back to Budalangi. From news we've just seen, 11,206 families at risk and requiring help. The big question is, why can't the people who are tasked with doing this do the right thing? Do the right thing. What is the right thing? By now we should have had dikes built, dams built in Budalangi, all right? I don't know which river is near Budalangi. Is it River Nyando? Is it River Yala? I don't know. I can't remember which river it is. My geography fails me. But something should have been done by now to rescue the people from Budalangi from having to perennially cry about the same thing, because they were asking for aid. Dr. Kitili said, aid cannot be our plan A. Giving aid cannot be our plan A. Should be our plan B, plan C. At the very onset, we should be able to find that issue has been dealt with in Budalangi. Floods is in the history. So why hasn't it been done? We ask tough questions. Has money been allocated and then the money has disappeared and directed to other uses? All right. Where is the prioritization on some of those things? So Yeah, if we just get our priorities right, I believe countries like Kenya can be resilient enough.
Getting our priorities right, I mean, President William Ruto was, of course, is celebrated for having convened, let me say, the entire world, because not only just the African states, I believe, followed the African Summit 2023. Wasn't that effort enough? Doesn't Kenya then show its efforts and intention to mitigate things like this? Starting from the head of state, Dr. Onyango, what is your observation? We seem to be more intentional than the actions we're seeing in words.
Yeah, thank you. I want to look at this particular issue by looking at three things.
Right.
I want to go back to the functions of government. Then I want to look at the two concepts that are very important in climate change, and then look at what is happening practically in Dubai and Kenya. Now, if we go back to the functions of government, which are 5: extractive, distributive, regulative, symbolism, and emergency response. These particular 5 functions, they help each other. They are mutual. For example, a state extracts resources and as its function by collecting taxes and redistributes it during emergencies, keeps it and gets prepared and redistributes. So the question is, to what extent is our government doing it? And you will give me an answer to it in comparison to what other governments are doing based on that particular function. Now, when it comes to climate change, there are two concepts that are very important: mitigation and adaptive, and of course the concept of resilience. Now, to what in adaptive aspects, to what extent can we live with the issues of climate change within us? In what ways do we adapt ourselves to be resilient to it?
Right.
So you ask yourself, we see President Ruto leading Kenyans in planting trees.
Right.
Yeah. But to what extent is the government leading people like in Nyando to live with the floods that are constantly pounding them? And in northeastern province, to what extent is government leading them to be prepared to live with the flood situations? Now, as Dr. Edgar said, what happened in Dubai is something unusual, because they have claimed the sand dunes and created trees and a living environment from their people from the desert. Now, I'm sure with the resources that they have, what has caught them unaware would be actually adapted to. They will be resilient to it next time when it happens. Now, in comparison to all this, to what is happening in Kenya, to respond to your question, is to what extent are we leaving the function of government being done the way they are supposed to? To what extent are we adapting to the flood situations or disasters? And to what extent are our governments leading us to be prepared for this particular? That's the big question.
You know, just the other day, gentlemen, let's also appreciate a few, I would call it, weeks in the short history. We saw leaders in their capacity, CSOs, members of parliament. In fact, they were criticized for using helicopters for that. Movement to just plant trees. In fact, we had a whole exercise for that day, a day declared a holiday for that. So would you say then that was preparation in this earlier in terms of preparedness? Sometimes we need to give that where they deserve it, or do you think it was not very programmed? Because these trees, are they grown already?
I think that was, we can give credit for that. And it is pretty much part of long-range planning.
Okay.
Because some trees may take 5 years to mature, some may take 10, some may mature within 2 years. But that bit of, encouraging Kenyans to plant trees is a very positive, aspect, environmentally speaking. And I think I can confidently give credit to the current regime for emphasizing on the same, because having a strong forest cover is part of what I may call environmental diplomacy. Now, within environmental diplomacy, we have afforestation, we have mitigation against forestry degradation, and as we go and focus our attention on those activities, we simultaneously mitigate against natural resource environmental conflicts. And so the idea of marshalling Kenyans to plant trees is very vital. Yeah, it's very vital, and I think we are moving on the right track.
All right.
Yes.
Dr. Nyanga, I want to come back to you, but quickly let me just hear. You know, they say citizen participation is not just nice to have. All right, it's just not nice to have citizen participation. What I'm reading here is that it is the lifeblood of a resilient city, and local communities must be empowered. I think that's something that Dr. Onyango said. They must be empowered through not just skills, but resources, all right, to take ownership and become active participants in the nation building and mitigating these disasters. Now, I'm speaking to the Kenyans. Remember, we have some very key informal settlements right now that have been traversely and tragically affected by the floods, leave alone Syokimau. Yeah. We're looking at Kibra, Mkuru and Jenga, areas of the sort. And Kibra is one of the largest slums right here in the city. Yeah. So what happens to them when these floods happen? Have we learned enough? Because I'm yet to hear an authority, because in the roundup we had, I don't think we personally right here covered the slums.
So with climate resilience, number one, the definition being the ability of communities and people to bounce back after these natural disasters have occurred, like climate shocks, these floods. Now, seeing that we are in this phenomenon and climate change is here with us, and we'll have perennial floods or droughts. Now, you remember in Kenya, I will use the concept of the Nyumba Kumi concept in Kenya. If the government could ape the Nyumba Kumi concept for security matters, the Nyumba Kumi concept deals with security issues, have the same committee or similar committees created up to the grassroots level for climate resilience, such that in Kibra, we have people designated as the point men who can teach their fellow, who can be trained, and who can be the ones who now talk to their fellow, residents and neighbors. In case we get a flood, this is what we will do.
I'm sorry to interject. Are you looking at this because I have hosted a number of volunteers? They do that because they care about their community, because they come from there. So they will say, I and together with some 10 boys decided to do this. But when you're speaking, are you speaking of in a voluntarily aspect or a government paid,
government-driven aspect? Okay. The same way the government has talked about hiring community health workers. Let's now have community disaster pointmen, whatever name we'll coin for them, such that we know in Kibra we have 50 community disaster marshals, let's call them that. They will now, not on voluntary basis, the problem of volunteerism, and it is beautiful, is that sooner or later, because of lack of resources, even the people who are volunteering have bills to pay. So they will not be volunteering and standing by and doing all these things without going out and getting other economically viable projects to work on. But if we have a government-driven process, in Kibra we have 50 development preparedness or disaster marshals. They train, they become trainer of trainers, they train their community in case we get this disaster, be it flooding, be it fire, be it an earthquake, this is what we are supposed to do. And it is government funded, they are on the government payroll.
Okay.
Trust me, we start building that climate resilience within our own population. So if we cascade this up to now the village level, talk about Mandera, talk about Budalangi, all corners of the country, then we get a community or we get a populace that is now climate resilient. We are now aware that floods can happen, fire can come, an earthquake can come, landslides can come, this is how we're supposed to respond. Just like we said, the fire drills we do in our organizations, think in that concept, but now government funded. And probably even a line ministry or a PS appointed to deal with all that. Just make sure the country is disaster prepared, is climate resilient. Then I think the country starts moving forward in the right direction.
Because this is going to relay the economy eventually. We're trying to stabilize our economy.
Yeah.
And that has been the talk in day in, day out. Do we realize that people are not going to open their kiosks this morning? Some are not going to make it to work. And I want to hear, just pick it from what Dr. here said, because that is an economic factor. The roads I have driven through today, and a lot of litter has been swept onto the main road, which shows you how it's not a coincidence, however, that there's been trash as well on the sides of the road. So an economic factor needs to be looked at this globally as well, as much as we're just talking about floods.
Yes.
Dr. Onyango.
Yeah, I'm glad, when we spoke about planting trees, that's a mitigating factor, and I'm glad you brought the concept of resilience, which falls within adaptation in climate change. Now, and then the economic factor. How do we get our people to live with the flooding problems? It's through participation, through creating of awareness, through making sure that when floods happen, livelihood do not stop. They continue. That hustler will still continue selling whatever they are selling to earn a living. Now, that can only come about when we make sure that we implement things the way they are supposed to. Now, you showed us a clip where a government official, a governor, is saying that we told you move away from the river banks. Now, this governor has been living with her people all through. What has she been doing to make sure that people don't build houses in the riparian areas? We have an authority called NEMA. What has NEMA done to make sure that people don't build shelter in riparian areas? Because it's an authority that is supposed to make sure that that is done. So when we talk about resilience and citizen participation, it boils down to lack of implementation of the good policies that we have in place.
Good policies that we have in place, yet not implemented.
Yes.
It's not something to be proud of. So who do we task with this lack of implementation? Because I think blame game will only lead us down the trail.
We can only point it to the political will, because after all is said and done, the politics or the political club, so to speak, is the distributor of resources.
Doctor, I'm sorry to interject, because in Kenya, with our constitution now, when you say the political will, there is the national level, there is the county level, and you've seen, even in the papers, that governors seemingly are standing with their people. This is not, I don't know where you'd place this will. Is it goodwill?
Yes. I would say it is, to some extent, lack of political goodwill, and I want to quantify that.
All right.
Such that, let's take it up from the national government, whereby we are aware of some county governments which have been lamenting that there has been a delay of disbursement of funds. Now, if the governor has to allocate funds, say for disaster response or disaster mitigation, he or she will do that if the funds have been allocated in good time, if the policies that he or she has put into place have been able to be actualized in good time, So I think we need to speak very strongly that funding to the county governments have to be done promptly and adequately. Yeah, because some departments, I'm very much cognizant of the fact that some departments at some point were lamenting that they are underfunded. I'll give you an example of the former regime where even the Chief Justice, Mr. David Maraga, complained that at some point the judiciary was underfunded.
At some point. Okay.
Yeah, at some point. And then I quote him saying, as much as you want cases to move, we are suffocating because we cannot implement the speed that is required in offloading the cases that we have. That is just a case I can quote, but my point is that there is need for a prompt disbursement of funding from the national government to the county government, such that now the governor can be able now to allocate funding to different departments to ensure that the county government runs promptly or properly. And if that happens, the national government will take the credit. But if it doesn't happen, then we're all stuck in that confusion.
All right.
Thank you.
And you know, food is a necessity.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a necessity, and some crops have been destroyed. You saw some livestock trying to, be helped across some flooded area in a clip that was just shared on the screen. And gentlemen, the reality on the ground is what some papers have termed as under siege. All right, with the persistent downpour, danger lurks as water levels significantly rise in Masinga Dam. All right. Now, the Met Department wants the rains will continue until June, of course, as illegal structures in riparian land are blamed for causing floods. Again, blamed. So that the blaming aspect is coming in again. But the reality is 400 families that have been displaced in North Rift region. 400 families. Just one family can have how many children in the north? So 400 families, and of course, several hectares of food crops have been damaged. That's where I was going to. Or submerged by floods. So even when the government was talking about the great harvest we're looking at, thanking God for the rains, the fertilizer, of course, the one that's not fake, we're still seeing this, taking us backwards, so a few steps ahead.
Yeah.
Let's talk about food security.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. And that's the other problem. This flooding, climate change comes with it with a plethora of ripple effects, because now we have the flooding that endangers not only human lives but also now food security. Because now, like you mentioned, our bread basket, the Rift Valley, the North Rift and all those and Narok areas, if we do not have enough, or rather their crops have been destroyed, food security is an issue. Two, remember, if our geography is right, serves as right, after El Nino, it's La Nina. If those two go the way they're supposed to.
But should we, because I've not had the Met say, I know it's close to that, but we wouldn't really say this is El Nino.
If we continue...
Because we had that last year.
Yeah, I dare say if we continue with this intensity till June without let-up, it will be...
Why do you think the metric, especially in Kenya, is not declaring this an El Nino? Unless I missed it. Did anyone get that?
Because of the politics around that declaration last year. So they are just keeping off. They are not the ones who are going to call it. Last year, remember the debacle between one authority saying it is, the other one saying it's not. I think they are waiting first, but if it continues unabated with the same intensity till June, we're talking about a whole of 30 days in May. We first finish April, then we go into May, then into June. That will be almost an El Nino phenomenon. And immediately after that, La Nina follows. So we come from extreme cold and wetness, and then we move into this extreme heat. So food security is definitely something that already right now, government should be thinking about areas that are affected. If we are not going to get the bags of grain that we are expecting, certain regions of the country are going to face food security. So as we speak right now, the line ministries, the ministries in charge, should be thinking about, are we importing this maize? What are we going to do? Because we may not meet the target. What might be the shortfall? So I like Dr. Onyango, I like the way he puts it. Government's work is to be responsive and proactive. So right now, already start planning. What shortfall do we project? And there are experts in the Ministry of Agriculture who can project all this. What shortfall might we project? What do we do? So such that we don't get there. Kenyans are now facing drought, and then we are asking for help from all manner of well-wishers and donors. So, yeah, we've been caught flat-footed by the floods. Let's build resilience by trying to find out what did we miss and where did we go wrong, and block all our drainages. I know it is painful. Anybody who was constructed on a riparian reserve and is blocking a waterway, let's bring down that building. We'll talk about compensation and who broke the law later on. But let's just, you start doing it painfully, repairing the system. Let's get rid of those buildings that need to be gotten rid of. Dr. Kitili talked about people, corruption. It's corruption that makes people at City Hall or whichever other county government headquarters approve the construction of a building in an area they know it should not be built. So put X's. What is National Construction Authority, NCA? They are mandated to make sure that all these plans and all these things are followed. So NEMA, NCA, let's call them out. NEMA, NCA, county governments, do the right thing. What Dr. Onyango said, implement the policy, have the political goodwill to do the right thing, and trust me, some of these problems will almost solve themselves.
All right.
Yeah.
If you have a behavior of always running around to another country for help, now this is a global issue. Different countries are facing it in their own capacity. We're not even yet, talking about the Iranian war, which will probably affect us as well. And at that point, when it happened, the fuel prices in Kenya had just dropped. The question I'm going to is the self-sustainability aspect. And I know that we're not an island, but if you look at the United States of America, it's different states. So Florida would, of course, have floods. I think that was mentioned, either Florida or so. There's a way they would lean on the other state if they're not, greatly affected. But we are a county kind of state. Now, if different governors are in a blame game for their own sustainability in their counties, how are they going to assist the other county? Or are we still waiting to again open up a pay bill number for the rest of Kenyans? Because that seems to be a norm, where Kenyans have to go into their pockets to help other Kenyans, and it's now probably a culture. My question is, do you have any self-sustainability measures? And as far as food security is concerned, you might not be critically experts in that area, but I would tap in the little expertise in as far as self-sustainability and food security when such disasters happen, like the floods. Dr. Onyango.
Yeah, I would like to start by the blame game and then come to security and sustainability.
Yes.
That there are two things. Those who experience life tend to blame because they are not prepared, or they go for positions of responsibility because they look at the salary, but they are not well prepared to do the job. So they will keep blaming people. But if you are well prepared, anything that happens, you have this concept of lived experience. You solve the problems as they come. Now, what is happening is that when we are talking about self-sustainability in terms of food security,
right,
the weather experts have told us these rains are going to go on up to June, and Dr. Edgar has alluded to it. What is the responsibility of the different institutions in the country in terms of being prepared for food security, to secure our nation in terms of food? Because definitely we are going to have a deficit. Those who are responsible for the food reserves for the country, what are they planning now to do to be prepared for what is going to happen? Because we don't want June to get to June or maybe end of the year. The rains have stopped, but now we start talking about lack of food in the food reserve. So this is our wake-up call. The experts have already told us, they've given us the forecast. What are the different institutions that are responsible for specific things? What are they doing? I would like to refer to the late General Gola and his attitude to life and how he took responsibility. This was a general who never sat in the office to wait for things to be brought to him in terms of report. He went to the operation areas. He went to see what was happening, what his soldiers were doing. To what extent do we emulate such a person in terms of what we do? What is NEMA doing? What are the institutions that are responsible for reserve, food reserve doing? Now that the weather forecasts have told us that these rains are going to go on until June.
All right. You know, last year, because I'm going to give you a bit of statistics from last year, the weatherman spoke. Of course, there was that contradiction, miscommunication, but they did speak on the floods. And remember, schools were also ongoing, and there was concern about January schools, etc. So I'll come to education. But if you remember, there were members of parliament, because you've said, you know, people need to go on the ground, who got lost. I don't know if you remember in Nigeria, members of parliament, they're trying to reach their people. I personally got to interact with one of them on a show, and the word at that time was the airlifted food, all right, and the airplanes that we are told about that are sent to people, relief food for that matter. They only saw that plane, I think, once or twice in the period, and that was the grievance. So in as far as equity during this time and the areas that need help, I don't know, what are your expectations on how this should be carried out? Because we don't want a position where we are here saying relief food is being given. Kenyans are getting help. There might be disparities, and what would be your word to the government in as far as the floods are here? So equally mitigating in different areas of the country. What would you advise the ministries and the bodies in charge of relief food distribution at this point in time?
Yes, thank you. Relief food distribution is a humanitarian activity.
Yes.
And what the different government departments need to do, I would recommend that they work in a collaborative manner. And they work so that every area, every region that is affected by floods at least gets the requisite food relief that is necessary. And this would entail mapping up a very sober approach in mapping up the areas that are affected and getting responsible personnel to make sure that the relief food or relief services reach the very people affected. Now, we know that the International Commission of the Red Cross has been very vocal and very active in the same area. But I think we can beef it up with our locals. So in that case, therefore, we should have centers in county government where the county governments, they are at the grassroots level. They know where people have been affected, and therefore relief food should be channeled to the county governments, so that now, after the mapping is done, then it can reach the people that have been affected by the floods or any other natural calamity. That's my take.
All right, Doctor, let me just go back to Dr. Onyango briefly, because what I'm seeing here is Kenya has joined Global Task Force in tax plans to raise about $2.4 trillion towards climate. Like I said, we are intentional to some extent, but looking at this as a country, does it place us in a better position to get aid? Because sometimes the PR is good, they say. So Kenya positioning itself in this, being very active globally in matters climate change, in terms of this kind of situations and alertness? Because there are countries that are watching. Is there positivity to that? And what is the professional lookout on how the president has been pushing for Kenya to strategically place itself as a country that's very, very intentional about climate change?
It's intentional and it's good.
Yes.
However, no country or nation should always depend on aid. Aid, as a concept, when it was started in 1950 after the Second World War, to rebuild countries that had been, reconstruct countries, the European countries that had actually been affected by the Second World War. Aid was intended to be something that is used for short-term purposes, not long-term. So any country that anchors its development based on aid, that international community will come to its rescue, then it's getting it wrong. Now, I would like to see a government that is mobilizing resources locally, because the resources are there. How they are utilized is the problem. Even in your own household, you have to live within the means of your salary or your income. If you live beyond it, then it's a disaster. You cannot be eating bacon or cake when you don't have enough. When you don't have enough, what you resort to is something that you can afford. So though it is intentional and it's a good thing, but we should not see it as the solution to all the problems that we have in the country. We need a proper plan based on the resources that we have in the country, and the government needs to lead us in mobilizing those particular resources to make sure that we mitigate and adapt to climate change effects.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what Dr. Onyango has talked about. Aid is a short-term measure. Aid should be a short-term temporary measure, sometimes to just plug in some budget deficits and all that. We need to government needs to plan for better ways of just Kenya moving forward. And in the context of climate resilience, I get back to disaster preparedness, and then disaster preparedness, and number two, everybody doing the right thing. The NCA making sure it's only approving buildings that are in the right place. NEMA coming and making sure that people are nobody's constructing next to the riparian reserves. No sacred cows. Back to the county governments by just way of recommendation. Yes. I don't know whether they do it. But every county government, every forward-looking county government needs to have its own disaster management department, and then probably have a contingency fund of 10% of whatever it is allocated every year by the national government. Say we will reserve 10% of our income every year for disaster preparedness and disaster management, such that if anything happens, and of course disasters are exactly that, things that are not planned for, we have extra money where we can make sure we are resilient, we're able to overcome. Our people are not going to be left stranded. For example, and looking at what's happened to Machakos County.
Yes.
At the back of the clip you showed us, behind the governor, I saw some mattresses. So I'm supposing maybe those ones were bought in a shelter somewhere so that the people who are stranded could come and live. And she said there's food. So that is, she got the money from somewhere. If it's county money, she got that money from somewhere. If it's not a well-wisher who has donated it. So why can't other counties, all counties, have disaster management departments within them, fully funded, fully kitted, fully staffed, people who are trained and they can go for professional training. The military can train them and other people can train them, such that across Kenya we are all disaster resilient. Let's not just talk about climate resilience. Let's just talk about disaster resilience. Whatever hits you, an earthquake, a fire, floods, we're able to bounce back and pick up our lives from where it was, and with less human life lost. So it's just about forward thinking. Let these disasters that have come upon us one after the other teach us lessons that by now we should have learned. By now we should have learned, because, gentlemen, it is not entertaining, and neither is it amusing to see the expressway flooding at some point in time. That clip went round the globe, I suppose.
And I want to hear your reactions. Let me start with you on that, because our infrastructure, like I basically said, how many people haven't gone to work? And they will use that as an excuse, or they just cannot make it to work.
It's true.
So we should have learned, and this was earlier on, before we even saw Syokimau, etc. Did we learn? What was the, some of these things come to ours.
Yeah, I don't want to excuse, I don't know who's in charge of the expressway. I don't know if it's Kenha, I don't know which of the Kenha, Kura and Kera. I don't know who's in charge of the expressway, but I'm just imagining it flooded because the drainages were blocked. All right, they are contractors. I know someone probably has the contract to maintain that expressway. Maintain is the key word, is the operational word here. It was built with taxpayers' money, a lot of money. All right. Who is supposed to maintain and make sure those drainages are not blocked? I literally saw a river, and the danger of it is that we are just lucky that no human life was lost, but many cars were stalled. The man hours, in terms of economic man hours, a lot of people went into repairs of their vehicles that, that were unplanned for. So it is just doing the right thing. If you're supposed to maintain, if someone is given a contract to maintain a particular road, a particular highway, are you unblocking the drainages? Me and Dr. Onyango use Thika Road, superhighway a lot. And for the longest time, we're always finding people either repairing the guardrails, if they've been vandalized. We find people sweeping. That is someone, whoever does that, kudos to them. Someone is trying to make sure that this is well kept. And when was a superhighway built? During Kibaki's era, many years ago. The expressway was just the other day. Who slept on the job? That's a question you want to ask. Yeah.
Who slept on the job? It's not a matter of building it, top-notch, high class, world class, but maintenance. So maintenance is also coming in as a concept here, and because we're looking at even the schools. If I look at this particular, documents that I have, schools in different parts of the, the country are even asking themselves if, for any reason, they might have a classroom to go to once they resume the second term, I believe. Some are even opening at the end of this month. And let me go to Kitileo on this, because I know you're a scholar. All of you are scholars. You do want to see all these young people not missing a particular module. So maintenance, because there's one thing to build, and these disasters will strike anyway. They will strike. Maintenance. What is your position? What have you seen? Because you look at countries which Dr. Nyango will say are developed, you can see some level of maintenance, of infrastructure, some readiness in as far as that is concerned, how they are built. But even when they are broken down or brought down, how fast do you put them back up as a management skill?
There should be a policy for continuous maintenance of infrastructure.
Is it that we don't have it? I trust that we have some of these policies in place.
Yes.
Dr.
Now, I'm still coming on.
All right.
Having the policies in place, now we should have some monitoring and evaluation structures, such that we will continuously monitor whether those policies are being implemented, and we also evaluate whether the implementers have done the right thing. And if we find that there's any variance from the norm, then we pin responsibility to whoever or whichever system that has slept on the job. That way, we should be able to come up with a properly maintained infrastructure. There could be schools, there could be colleges, even farming system, agricultural systems. We need to also monitor and evaluate if the government has purported to send certified seeds, for example, or fertilizer. Has it been dispatched and has it arrived at its envisioned destination? So I think monitoring and evaluation mechanisms should help us in our maintenance of our system.
Because quite unfortunately, there is the nation, of course, has learned that some books have been ruined. And of course, the extent of the damage will only be known once the water is drained out in some area. So that's pretty much the situation on the ground. I want us to come to a conclusion on this floods conversation, but of course, I'll come back with your closing remarks. And as you're watching this morning, the Met department has warned that these floods will go all the way, the rains rather, will continue to as far as the month of June. So be vigilant, follow closely. The only unfortunate happening, gentlemen, is we cannot assume the whole of Kenya or Kenyans have access to phones or probably can Google and know what the Met is saying. But also the question is, how does this information reach the grassroots where they are? Let's listen into the soapbox this morning. The soapbox is a number of remarks said across the week on current affairs, because even as we're speaking, if something does happen during these floods and somebody needs medical attention, the doctors seemingly are still on strike, give you developments of that as well, what happens? Let's take a look at the soapbox.
Skipped the meeting of yesterday. I want to reiterate that we did not skip. We explained to them that as a union, we are democratic, and once we have a negotiation and we have issues at hand, we must discuss them before we proceed in either calling of the strike or saying no to some of the issues.
According to the labor laws, you are not supposed to earn a salary if you have not worked. And therefore, those who have been on strike and they have not been working, a strike that had been suspended by the court, definitely we should not expect any pay.
The Ministry of Health has managed to get 3.5 billion for payment of salary arrears from 2017 to 2024 June. This will be paid in 5 installments each financial year.
We will not leave the interns behind. We are not discussing that. It's non-negotiable. Number 2, the statutes, the collective bargaining agreement, those ones should not be touched.
Tunamsihi kwamba asikize sauti ya wale ambaye ni wakereketo halisi, wafanyakazi katika sekta hiyo ya afya, ambao sisi ndio tunajua kwamba kidonda kiko wapi na kinauma wapi.
Tusipoaibisha wale ambao wako kwenye mamlaka, hakuna chochote kitafanyika Kenya hii. Kuje mbele ya Senate atuelezee kwa nini inaweza kuchukua siku 21 kama hajaita mkutano na nyinyi. Afute kazi huyu waziri wake wa afya, aite representatives wa nurses, doctors, clinicians na lab technicians, awaombe msamaha, akubaliane na mambo yao, aombe Kenyans msamaha, Kenya isonge mbele.
Judicial inquest into the accident and death as opposed to mere investigation led by the military that is close to civilians. We also demand that families of the victims be independently represented in the investigation and inquest. We are seeing worrying signs. We have noted that Mr. Ruto set up a separate investigation team away from the one gazetted by its cabinet secretary Kipchumba Murkomen.
Us and our marine officers were able to trace the bodies around Kokwa Island, and the bodies have been successfully brought to the mainland and moved to Kabarnet mortuary. We want to say pole to the families.
Boat was carrying 23 people on board, of which the boat was supposed to be carrying about 8 to 10 people maximum. I'd like to call upon the beach management unit and the people, the Boat Owners Association, to enforce the regulations and laws to be carrying the right number of people.
Hiyo mwili ilipatikana kwa hiyo mlima, chini ya hiyo mlima ambayo alikuwa anaenda kuomba Mungu. Na ilipatikana wote 6. Tuliona Mungu ametusaidia. Si rahisi kupata mwili 6 safari moja. Mara nyingi tukiwa na shida kwa hii bahari inachukua muda kupatikana watu kwa sababu ya upepo inapeleka watu.
Tafadhali tokeni kwa mito. Kama tuko na wengine wako hapa mto wa Mau, tumeweka gari zetu standby hapa na tumekubaliana sisi wote hapa kama team. If we see there is a danger, tumeweka magari, hao watu waende wachukuliwe, waletwe hapa, walale hapa, kuna chakula, kuna kila kitu.
nataka tuelewane ya kwamba kuajiri ni muhimu. Sisi tudhibitishe ya kwamba kila nyumba hapa liko salama kukaa na.
Just a glimpse of the remarks on the current affairs. Let me hear from Dr. Edgar at this point in time, because the question now is, we have the medical, if you want to call it, stalemate. The doctors equally deserve their rights based on how the negotiations will go and the table. But there's the common mwananchi, who's a 6-year-old child or with pneumonia or asthma, or just exposed to this particular tragedy or natural disaster, might need medical help. So we're looking at this.
Yeah, thanks. It's a catch-22, because on one hand, I understand what the doctors say. I mean, the average doctor takes around 7 years, 8 years to get that medical degree, just to become a general practitioner. So not everybody can become a doctor. Not everybody is wired to become a doctor. So I understand it from that perspective. But again, I'm also looking at ability to pay by government, contingents to pay, ability to pay by government. And I'm thinking there needs to be a compromise, a middle ground, because these doctors at their graduation signed the Hippocratic Oath, where, to safeguard lives. Medicine, nobody goes into medicine. If it's not a calling, I don't know what any doctor is doing if it's not a calling for them. So I have a feeling that human life, for me, takes precedence. In all this, for both government and the doctors, they need to realize the person who is getting hurt is the ordinary mwananchi. That lady who is, those ladies who have probably given up their lives when they are delivering, in their most vulnerable moment. So there needs to be concerted effort to bring this strike to an end. And for me, as a peace and conflict practitioner, I think mediation needs to just be done from a different perspective. These hardline positions are hurting everybody, all right? These hardline positions are hurting the country. The country's health sector is reeling. And now coupled with these floods and attendant disasters that are coming up, lack of medical personnel is going to hurt the country. So for me, a middle ground for both of them. They need to both climb down from their high horses, all right? Government needs to be reasonable in what it is offering. And the medics, the interns, need to also be realistic about the current economic times that we are living in. So a middle ground. Do I have a figure in mind? I don't think I want to throw my figure in mind. They're demanding for 200,000. What is the ability to pay? Government and the wage bill and the debt crisis in the country. So just a middle ground for both of them, in favor and especially in view of the common mwananchi. So for me, it's just a cry for a cry to reason for them. Let's think about the people who are really hurting and the real people who really need those services.
Right. Different counties taking this differently. In fact, you'll be shocked. There's some counties where, probably there is health, services still going on, at least at the minimal level. Dr. Onyango, because when you talk of responsive mechanisms, we need medical practitioners on the site. They're part of the response to these floods that we're seeing. And to this point, where the negotiations hopefully should yield something, whether they flop yet again, there's still some optimism in the Kenyan that we need our medical doctors. And remember, the floods are ongoing, you've seen. And even as I look at this, because we're about to wrap up this, it's important that I read this update here from Mathare. And the search for 6 individuals reported missing in the Mathare slums has been temporarily suspended due to severe flooding. There's an immediate need for donations of clothing, food and shelter to assist those affected by the floods. So is medical care. So what would be your remarks at this point in time to the Kenyan watching and to the authorities involved, including the medics? Yes.
Thank you. I think it goes back to the responsibility of government. And what Dr. Edgar said, that all the stakeholders need to come out from the high-standing, hardline position and negotiate, having Kenyans at heart. And this responsibility does not fall squarely on the medics who are being blamed that, go back to work regardless, you have an ethical oath. But you see, matters ethics also play in terms of morality. What about the families of the doctors? How do they earn a living? How do they exist? So we need to be fair by looking at government. What is the budget of government, and how much does government spend on different aspects? So you can't have a government that is paying its cabinet ministers so highly and the president and all those high level, and leave people like doctors struggling, and then you tell them, we want you to understand. So in negotiation, we need to have what we have, and then put it at the table and say, okay, this is the situation, and we want you to understand. Maybe government also needs to cut down on its costs. Maybe State House needs to cut down on its extravagant expenditure and maybe redistribute down to healthcare. Those are all things that needs to be put at the table. It goes back to the responsibility of the functions and capabilities of the government.
As I go back to, of course, Kitalewa, because in my mind I am thinking, in the middle of this, of course you're saying this needs to be fair, but I'm looking at a family of a single mother, for example, somewhere in Turkana. Maybe it's not really affected by the flash floods, but in that kind of situation, is this where we would have had the government setting aside, and at this point in time, community health workers, etc., are they able to come in? Because the public is tasking me to pretty much bring our minds together to understand what can they do today if they go to a public hospital and they do not find the emergency response that they require to a medical attention that has been caused by the rains and the floods. What do you think is happening on the ground right now, if there is still negotiations happening? Because we're going to be talking to the Ministry of Health as well on the matter. Because in the interim,
yes,
and the floods and the disasters are also coming with some medical issues.
Yes.
What is happening to the Kenyan?
Ideally, the government should have a response fund.
Yes.
Emergency response fund,
yes.
Maintenance fund. We were talking about maintenance. Any responsible government should have that, to the extent that when there are strikes like this, they reach out to that particular fund to make sure that people do not suffer.
Yes, thank you.
As we take a break, yes.
Yeah. What I would say is that our governance system should put into place plan B for every system that ought to run. And in this regard, we are caught in a 22 scenario, catch-22 scenario, so to speak. Here are doctors, nurses and every other person in the medical fraternity. They're asking for increase in salaries, and on the other side we have the government authority that they're saying we cannot pay. So what I would advocate for is again, as Dr. Onyango said and Dr. Edgar said, when there's need for people to come and sit soberly on a negotiating table.
All right.
To look for a win-win scenario. Conflict resolution is about having a win-win outcome. I'm afraid if they'll continue moving forward and back.
As we take a break.
Yes, on litigation, we might not have a solution.
Okay.
So it's important for them to look at other avenues of negotiation. And I think conflict resolution would help us in this matter.
Conflict resolution, even looking at it further beyond our local current affairs, we're looking at the Israel-Iran tension, which might have a ripple effect on not just East Africa, but Kenya. We'll be right back with our conversation after this break.